Hello, welcome to a star rating videos for Into the Emerald Dreams. First, I want to say actually a few things, but one thing in particular. I said at the start of doing all my reveal videos that I wasn't sure if I was going to invest in this set. To be honest with you, I feel like I need a bit of a break from Hearthstone. At the end of like the last cycle in particular, I wasn't really enjoying the game anymore. It got to the point where the mini set came out with the StarCraft stuff, and everyone was like, oh my god, this is amazing, I love Hearthstone again. And I was still like, I'm not really enjoying this. And at that point, I knew it was me and not the game anymore. So, before I do any of this, I think it's important to note to you, it's one thing we do in these star ratings when I'm going to invest in this set because, you know, I am putting money in it. I have skin in the game. This time, though, I have no skin in the game. So take my ratings with a pinch of salt because instead, I'm not financially putting into the game this cycle, unlike other cycles. Not to say down the line I might not come back and, you know, get this and get the itch again to play Hearthstone, but right now, I'm just not feeling it. And that's even despite this game, honestly, nearly pulling me back in again. I love the theme of it. I love that they've also pulled the power level down. This also isn't anything to do with the fact I think the set is going to be particularly weak. I will actually say, though, before they nerf those, or they're going to nerf those 20 cards or so, I did think this was going to be the weakest set ever in respect to the previous standard cycle. Now, it was a bit unfair to, you know, completely say that because an entire rotation happened, so that always is the case. At the start of a new cycle, the set is always a bit weaker, but I thought in particular the power level's low. But now they've nerfed some, like, pretty big cards. I actually think there is a world where some of these new cards from Into the Emerald Dream will actually see play in Tier 1 decks. So that's the big thing I want to just say at the very beginning. And I'm being sincere about this, enjoy the set. I think it's actually a really potentially fun set. It actually is a nod back to really old Hearthstone. I've been playing from Whispers of the Old Gods, and it reminds me of those aesthetics, like the fantasy setting and stuff, you know, dragons and warriors and stuff. It seems really cool, so. But yeah, as I said, I just need a bit of a break from the game. The other thing I'll say is how I normally do my star ratings. Normally what I do, and this is actually what I'm going to do right now, I give things 5 stars if I think it's going to go into a tier 1 deck, 4 stars for tier 2, 3 for tier 3. If it's going to be tier 4 or might see a bit of play here and there, I put it as 2 stars, or at least some testing, and then 1 if I think it's going to see absolutely no play. Normally when I do these star rating videos, I put together a bunch of Theorycraft decks, and then kind of like evaluate the power level of those decks in respect to the game. Now, because I've not decided not to invest in it, I've not done that, so I'm going to take a leaf out of Uncle Nigel's book, and I'm just going to go with feeling, right? I'm just going to say how I feel like the decks will work, but I've not actually theorycrafted them. I've probably got a lot more things wrong in this scenario than I would do in the past. And in the past, I get things wrong, so. And also, a core set rotation has just happened, and it always makes these theory crafting things really hard to, like, work out. Especially with the balance patch as well, because a lot of the decks that were tier 1 in the past, where it's like, okay, these cards wouldn't see play over those cards, they're getting nerfed. They're also losing cards from those decks, so it's really, like, it's really wide open for what decks could be powerful. In general, though, my hand-wavy rule of thumb right now, this set has not got a lot of aggressive decks printed into it. I do think there will be aggro decks out there, but it's certainly, the aggro decks are less powerful now than they were a few months ago. As a result, I think control decks or slower value generating decks will become more prominent, at which point, if that is really true and there's no aggro deck that can sneak under you, you kind of want to be really greedy in the way you build your deck. So I think really greedy decks could perform well. I'll also say that I do think that most of the tier 1 decks that will come out of this cycle will still be decks from the past. Like, I think some of the Starship decks, including maybe Starship decks that weren't really that strong in the last cycle, may actually rise up the rankings just because other things like the Titan set has moved out of the way. There's a lot less stealing cards, a lot of less poofing cards away. So suddenly these big generated guys might have a place in the game. So that is my overall theme to begin with. Anyway, let's get down to the cards themselves. And we're going to start with Death Knight. Death Knight has Infested Breath, Sanguine Infestation, Hideous Husk, Ursoc, Rite of Atrocity, Grotesque Runeblade, and Morbid Swarm, which I think generally together are cards you might see in some sort of Control Death Knight deck. And I actually think Control Death Knight deck is going to be a particularly strong deck. It has a lot of potential value generations, like some cheat engines, and Blood Death Knight has especially some extremely strong control cards. Corpse Explosion, I believe, is still in the set, and I think that's going to be a really big card for dealing with these potential big boards you might have to deal with from some of the other decks out there. Also, I think the set is going to be finally the time where Kil'jaeden really shines. Kil'jaeden was actually seen quite a lot of play before, but if we get into these situations where it is just truly like, you need grotesque value, Kil'jaeden is almost certainly going to go into a lot of these decks just because it means that you can go on for infinity. And Death Knight has its own version of Kil'jaeden in the form of the Headless Horseman. So I think, and because of Headless Horseman, you're probably going to put an Unholy Rune requirement. So I think you're going to have Double Blood, Single Unholy, and I think that's going to be the strongest of the Death Knight decks. And I think you're going to put a lot of these cards in. I think these leeches are actually, they look underwhelming on paper, but in practice, being able to give yourself a ton more max health, it's going to be fairly big, especially if there are any like mid-rangey decks out there. That is just a nightmare for the mid-range decks, for the true greedy value decks, just to keep going further and further away from lethal. Also, I think there will be some combo decks out there. And again, combo decks do not want to see someone going above 30 max health. And this is what Death Knight can do. That being said, I think not all of these cards will see play. I think the Leech cards will all see play in this Blood Death Knight deck, and I think it's going to be about a tier 2 deck. I might be being a bit generous, maybe it's tier 3, but I think it's going to be somewhere around that tier 2 region. And I think you'll definitely put Infested Breath, Sanguine Infestation, and Hideous Husk. I think all of those get plugged into that package. Rite of Atrocity, I think, will also make that list. There isn't really a big theme for all the classes that have Dark Gifts, with the Dark Gift mechanic, with the exception of Warlock. But I do think Rite of Atrocity is one of those cards where it's like, it's somewhat inoffensive. It'll probably make the list just because there's not that many cards you can put in your deck anymore. And it's a decent 1-cost card, especially if you start generating the Hideous Husk, with a Dark Gift, and if you can get double Battle Cry on that, that is actually frightening. So, because of those reasons, I can see Rite of Atrocity getting into this list as well. And similarly, Morbid Swarm, I think I was a bit harsh on the card on the reveals. I think 1 mana summon 2 tokens, which can turn into 2 corpses, probably also just about makes that list. And again, being a control deck, you're probably going to be a bit slower, so you're not super desperate to put the 1/1 ants up unless you're going up against an aggro deck. If it's something a bit more mid-rangey, you probably will be willing to spend the 2 corpses to kill a guy to let you live into the later game. So I think all of these cards probably get into that deck. Ursoc and Grotesque Runeblade, I've only given 2 stars to. I don't think Ursoc will go into any deck. There might be a bit of testing in the Blood Death Knight deck, but man, I think Corpse Explosion and some of their other options are just simply going to be more consistent than Ursoc is. So Ursoc, nice card if you can generate it, but I don't think it'll go into the main deck. And similarly, Grotesque Runeblade probably will see some play, some testing at the very least. It really depends when you put this list together, and again, I haven't put the full list together, so I don't know how many Blood Unholy Rune cards you put into the deck, because if you get both the effects on Grotesque Runeblade at the same time, the card's actually really good, and then it definitely sees play. But just with my hand-wavy approach, I'm actually not sure how many of these Blood Unholies you put into the deck, so I've erred on the side of caution and said it's probably something, it's certainly not going to be a desperate card you put in that deck, so 2 stars I think is fair enough. The final 3 cards, I don't really know what to do with them. Nathandra, Corpse Flower, and Monstrous Mosquito. I feel like it's sort of meant to be like a token-based deck. Generate a bunch of corpses, and have Corpse Flower kill people along the way. And through the token generation, which is typically what the Triple Unholy Rune deck does, you can use the Monstrous Mosquito to give them more attack, to be a bit more threatening. Personally, having looked through the cards like as a brief summary, I don't think there's going to be a particularly strong Triple Unholy Death Knight deck out there. So, I'm sorry Nathandra, I'm sorry Monstrous Mosquito, only 2 stars. I think it'll see a bit of testing these things, but the full package doesn't work. I think when you look at it, you look at the cards available to Double Blood, Single Unholy, and the Double Unholy, Single Blood, and I feel like stuff like Corpse Explosion is just too big a pull over something like Nathandra. Corpse Flower, actually, I'm only giving 1 star to. I don't even think that would go into that deck, which is kind of a shame. It's really weird. Corpse Flower, I think, is a pretty interesting card, but it's kind of like weeded off by 2 reasons. First, the Double Unholy Rune requirement is really brutal. It's definitely more of a control-oriented card, which is more of a Blood Rune requirement. And it being Double Unholy, again, it puts into this bracket where you're competing with stuff like Corpse Explosion. It simply can't. The other unfortunate thing is the Triple Unholy Rune deck normally wants to finish with Grave Strength, and that requires you to have the corpses to do it. And I don't think there's a good enough corpse engine to generate enough corpses for Corpse Flower, and then Grave Strength. And also, Corpse Flower, a bit of a slow card in a deck that you probably would suspect to be a bit quicker. So for all those reasons, and also ETC rotating out, I think these like niche tech cards suddenly drop in power levels, and I think Corpse Flower would have been a niche tech card against a fellow token deck enjoyer. So for those reasons, I think it's only going to get 1 star. Then we move over Demon Hunter land. Demon Hunter's got like 2 packages, I would say. One of them is this Dreadseed package. I think it's terrible. I've given 1 star to the Dread Soul Corruptor and the Wyvern Slumber. It's obviously like based on the Wild Seed mechanic, but the Wild Seeds, their best card was the card that made your Wild Seeds dormancy reduce by 1 turn, and Dread Seeds don't have that. And actually, generally speaking, the Dread Seeds are slower than the Wild Seeds. And normally in these more aggressive type mechanics, you want them to be a bit faster. I kind of still treat this Dread Seed as a bit fast. It should be a bit faster. Maybe it's a bit aimed towards mid-range. I'm not sure. Either way, I don't think it's going to work versus other things that Demon Hunter can do. I will actually say I've given 1 extra point to Grim Harvest. Grim Harvest is one of those cards that you might just actually splash into another deck, purely for 2-mana draw a card, get a guy. But even that is a bit slow. I probably was a bit generous. I just don't fully see this Dreadseed thing working. What I do think will work actually though is this Death Rattle Big Demon package with Ferocious Fellbat, Ravenous Fellhunter, Jump Scare, and Omen. I'll concede now, I don't think Omen will actually see playing that mechanic. What I think will actually happen is kind of what I said on the reveals, that you're going to have a Starship mechanic, and you're just going to generate this big Starship with the Arcanite Defense Crystal, which has a Death Rattle on it, and you're going to use Ravenous Fellhunter and Ferocious Fellbat to regenerate these ginormous spaceships, and you're going to gain a ton of armor. I think people are already calling it Armored Demon Hunter. I actually thought this might have been a tier 1 deck, and up until the point I recorded this, I actually had these as 5 stars. Well, I'll tell you now, I've only got them as 4 stars. There is a potential for this deck to be a tier 1 deck, but when I really ran the numbers in my brain, I couldn't help but think that the Warrior version of this deck, which can do something very similar, is just better. Like, Warrior's a better control deck. They've got big old Jim Raynor to resurrect everything back, even post-nerf. They still got Hydration Station, which is really strong. So I thought of the mirror of like Starship Warrior versus Starship Demon Hunter, which honestly with this Death Rattle mechanic would be very similar. And I think the Warrior deck would more often not beat the Demon Hunter deck. I think it'd be a really tedious matchup, by the way, but I think that would be the way that things go. Either way, I still think it's going to be a really, really strong deck. And as I said, I think the Starship decks, maybe some of the ones that didn't even work particularly well in the past, now, because of the power, like, not even the power creep, the power reduction, or whatever you want to call it, I think suddenly those decks and other mechanics, in fact, I could see stuff like Draenei Warrior suddenly becoming not too bad again, probably only tier 2-ish, but high tier 2, just because, again, there isn't that level of power in the game without the Titans and the showdown sets and those type of things in the game. I also think Jump Scare will make that list as well. Demon that costs 5 or more, you get to discover it, there's a decent chance you're going to hit one of these 2 cards, and they're kind of your engine, so Jump Scare will get into that list as well. Omen I've only given 2 stars to. I think there could be some sort of big demon package, but I don't think it's going to be as good as the Starship one, so Omen probably makes that list, but I don't think it's going to be very good, so around tier 4-ish, hence 2 stars. Then there is Defiled Spear. Defiled Spear, I'm going to give 3 stars to. I'm going to let you know, this is one of my watch this card space. I don't think the deck exists right now for Demon Hunter to use this card as well as it could possibly be used. But in the future sets, if there is some way for your hero to gain a big amount of attack, and there are some ways to gain attack, by the way, right now, which is kind of why I think it will be a deck, but I think it'll be around tier 3. If there are better ways for Demon Hunter to do stuff with their hero attack damage, Defiled Spear could actually jump up to being like a 5-star card. It's a seriously good card, just limited by the set it's in right now. So kind of watch this space on this card. The final 2 are Alrashi and Nightmare Dragonkin. Don't worry, you don't need to look for the future. 1 star on both of them. I guess Alrashi, look for the future if Demon Hunter has some way to generate a bunch of cheap cards in their hand. Then maybe you can do some sort of Alrashi shenanigans. But right now, most of the Demon Hunter cards are kind of specific, right? The Ferocious Fellbat is very specific for the package it wants to be in, which is resurrecting Death Rattle minions. Omen, is very specific potentially for some big demon package. The Among Us Demon Hunter kind of wants them to be the Among Us crew, right? I just don't think Demon Hunter has this package where they can fill the hand with a bunch of cheap cards which you simply want to transform. There's just not enough mechanics based around that, so I don't think a large will see any play. And the Nightmare Dragonkin, I think it's also a little bit weak. I feel like it's been printed mainly to be a dragon from another class. Basically a bit of pack filler. And then finally for this video, we'll get up to Druid. Druid has got, honestly, it's almost one big package. And it's the Imbue package based around Hamul Rune Totem and his crew of nature spells. I think this will be the strongest Imbue package out of the gate. I think the button of just summoning a bigger and bigger guy is, firstly, value you just get up front, which is going to be good, unlike the Imbue Paladin, which you might not ever get the value of it if you get really unlucky, or the Imbue Priest, where you might roll some bad cards. It's one of the few ones where you're not ever going to be super upset if you push your button for 2 mana and get a 4/4 out of it. That's going to be pretty good. Also, unlike all the other Imbue mechanics, and we could even go back to like Starship type things, you don't have to play these weaker cards in the build-up to getting your Imbue button off. And actually, I will say, I think the Imbue enablers from the neutral package, or some of the classic packages, are actually better than the Starships that were printed for the Starship package, which actually makes sense because the Starships have probably a bigger impact than the Imbue package. But that was the big weakness of the Starship package, right? You had to play these weak cards to get your Super Starship, and eventually then you get a big, massive power spike. However, the other issues of the game at that point was it was really easy to just ping off a big guy with a minion or something like that, or steal the card even. In the case of the Druids, they have ways to make their button ginormous pretty easily via just casting a bunch of nature spells. And the nature spells, unlike these cards, aren't underpowered. Like, they're powered appropriately for the spell that they are. And I think you could really crank this button up very, very quickly. So, for those reasons, I think I'm giving 5 stars to Hamul, Horn of Plenty, Reforestation Symbiosis, and Grove Shaper. And Dreambound Disciple, sorry. All of them will go into this Imbue Druid. I think being able to get a big button around 7 or 8 is not too unreasonable with these nature spell casters. And I think even just nature spells exist in the game right now. There is definitely a lot of fuel for this engine. I think this is going to be a pretty spooky package. Now, the only thing that stopped me giving Photosynthesis 5 stars actually is I don't put again the list together. I'm not sure this would quite make the cut. The Restore 6 health is a bit of a minor effect, honestly, especially since I suspect you're going to be putting a lot of spells in your deck. Realistically, you're probably putting that 6 health into yourself, which actually might be nice, so maybe I'm being a bit unfair about it. Also, 3 random Druid spells. I do appreciate you only have to cast spells to get the Hamul effect. Its only restriction is you have natures in your deck, so you actually will get the Imbue effect of Photosynthesis. But there are some weak random Druid spells out there. You'd much prefer to discover something or just draw another card from your deck. And actually, I also say about Symbiosis, I think this card is only ever going to discover pretty bad cards. I think the Choose One cards from the other classes are generally speaking poor cards. However, it's a 1-mana nature spell, so it will get into this deck. Photosynthesis, though, maybe is a 5-star card. Maybe it does make that list. I've just not put it all together, so I decided to hedge my bets a little bit. Word of Earth, though, I'm actually fairly confident won't see play. Unlike the other cards, which are a bit easier to splash in, like paying 1 mana or 2 mana, especially with like your button or something, is fairly reasonable. Photosynthesis at 3 gets a little bit more uncomfortable. At 5, playing Word of Earth is like extremely uncomfortable. So I don't think this card will see play. It's actually quite a weak card, even for like some past Hearthstone expansions from 5 or 6 years ago. Then Grove Shaper and Dreambound Disciple. Grove Shaper will just let you copy some of these nature spells. I mean, even stuff like Innovate, 0 mana nature spell, throw one of those into the Grove Shaper to just keep fueling your Imbue engine. I could actually see by like, turn 10 or something, if assuming the game goes that long, you might have like 12/12 on your button if you appropriately put the deck together. So yeah, I think it's going to be a really spooky package. And then Dreambound Disciple, I think there is a world where you can cast a bunch of nature spells very early. You play Dreambound on 3, you get a free button push, and you'll get maybe 7/7 stats on 3. If you can really crank out the nature spells. This would require stuff like Innovate into Horn of Plenty, that type of shenanigans. But it'll happen every now and again, and that is going to be so unbelievably disgusting, you're going to cry. So, for those reasons, I think Druid will be an extremely strong package. Finally, a Forest Lord Scenarios and Evergreen Stag, which I think are cards you could just splash into this deck. You could splash into all the decks. but I think they're both kind of weak, so I've given 1 star to both. I actually think Evergreen Stag's not too bad for a card that I think was printed with somewhat of the intention of being like a pack filler card. Normally, stat lines with a few keywords on it is a pack filler-esque card. Though the things that are on this card are kind of things that Druid would want, right? It's a fairly big guy, it protects the face via taunt, increases your health via lifesteal, and you can't just ping it with a spell with elusive, so I actually might be doing a bit of disservice there. This might actually see some play just to help stabilize Druids if they're doing some really insanely greedy stuff. Forest Lord scenarios, I think the button will be good enough in Imbue Druid. I just don't see a reason why you'd want to make sure you have to wait till 10 mana crystals to get the Forest Lord scenarios effect. I don't think it's necessarily bad, by the way. It's just, I think there are better things Druids can do other than this. So, for those reasons, I've only given it 1 star. Anyway, that'll do it for the first star reveal video. I'll keep them coming, obviously, over the next couple of days. And we'll just go through the classes in alphabetical order, and then finally end with the neutrals. If you've enjoyed this one, leave a like, comment, subscribe. Everything helps me out. I'll see you again next time. Bye!